The Wagner Group, one of the most deadly Russian military forces, known for its brutality and inhumane behavior. Founded in 2013, it has continuously participated in the most deadly operations around the world, murdering and torturing both soldiers and civilians. It has since been linked to armed conflicts in 9 countries. However, up until 2022, when the full-scale invasion in Ukraine started, the Wagner Group remained under the radar, with the Russian government never acknowledging the actual existence of such a unit within their armed forces. The speculations in media continued for years, with everything coming to light in the course of last year. What was the purpose of this, and why for already 10 years has Russia been using the Wagner Group to terrorize the world? The post-Cold War era brought a renaissance of private security companies and private military companies known as PMCs. Both state and non-state actors have frequently relied on their services, as these companies are more flexible, cheaper, less accountable, and often a lot more capable than regular militaries. The Kremlin has developed its own view of PMCs. Instead of approaching the question from the budgetary perspective, namely that PMCs are more flexible and cheaper than the regular military, Russia perceives them mainly as political military tools of state influence, which can be employed under the cover of plausible deniability. Another motivation for using PMCs is that it permits the Russian state to hide personnel losses from the Russian public. As these formations are formally private companies, their losses do not count in the official Russian Ministry of Defense reports of how many servicemen had died or been injured. Thus, reports about the lost service members never include losses suffered by Russian private military companies operating in the same operational theater. The same logic allows Russia to deny the involvement of its proxies in the conflicts, as PMC contractors do not count as service members. The private military company Wagner Group appeared shortly after its predecessor, Slavonic Corps, ceased to exist. Yevgeny Prigozhin was reported to be the man behind the organization of the Wagner Group, while Dmitry Utkin was known to be the frontman commander of the forces in the first years of its existence. A veteran of both Chechen wars, Utkin served in the GRU until 2013, after which he commanded a Spetsnaz unit, reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel. In 2013, he quit the service and joined the Moran security group, in whose ranks he participated in the Slavonic Corps' failed operation in Syria. He quit Moran and established the Wagner Group together with Prigozhin. The company was named after his old call sign, Wagner. In the first year, the group has recruited around 250 men. All have received the same message. You are going to be used in the most dirty operations around the world in the interest of the state. If you die, your body will not be retrieved and your death will not be mentioned anywhere. These were the words written in the contract of every Wagner soldier. Moreover, they were obliged to not disclose any information about the operations or location of the Wagner forcers. Even your family could not know your whereabouts for years. The punishment for breaching this rule in most cases was death. It is not unusual for Wagner fighters to execute their own comrades, leaving their bodies, in best cases, in unmarked graves. The rules were tough, and it is through insanely high pay that Russia managed to attract its citizens to join. The project was developing at a rapid pace, with less than a year separating Wagner fighters from facing their first true challenge. Winter of 2013, just 1 year before the invasion of Ukraine will take place. For many years, Russia has been planning the annexation of its neighbor's land, infiltrating the official ranks with their agents and exercising the power of its propaganda machine to its whole. The first step was Crimea, a region which already for a long time Russia has considered as their rightful land. The Georgian War in 2008 gave Kremlin an understanding that the West lacks the willingness to face reality and will prefer to look at a plate full of its beautiful lies than to accept the harsh facts of invasion. Wagner Group was meant to be such a lie, a weapon the Russians would use for the dirtiest work which wouldn't be fit for the regular armed forces. Created as a private organization, Wagner had no ties to the Kremlin government on paper, and from the outside seemed to be a regular private military company. This made it a perfect tool to be used for the invasion of Crimea in order to make it seem like a sort of internal conflict. On February 20th, 2014, Wagner Group fighters with unmarked uniforms and armored vehicles entered Ukrainian borders in Crimea, moving towards the centers of major cities and capturing all of the administration buildings. Ukrainian media called those soldiers little green men since they had no identification marks. The usage of Russian equipment made it clear that they had ties to the Russian military. The attack was well coordinated from both inside and outside. Kremlin took proper care to capture the region without resistance, working for years together with its agents on degrading the Ukrainian military and making it incapable of putting up a fight. The operation allowed Russia to capture Crimea without a single shot, and the use of Wagner Group made a perfect cover to not make it seem like a full invasion to the outside world. After almost no blood in Crimea, Wagner fighters were given a task in the Donbas region. Thanks to their support, insurgents were able to quickly destabilize Ukrainian law enforcers, immobilize the operation of local government, seize ammunition storages, and control the streets. They collaborated with pro-Russian leaders, strengthening their influence in the region. The PMCs conducted sneak attacks, reconnaissance, and intelligence gathering. The Wagner Group PMCs reportedly took part in June 2014 IL-76 airplane shootdown at Luhansk International Airport, and the early 2015 Battle of Debaltseve, which involved one of the heaviest artillery bombardments in recent history, as well as reportedly hundreds of regular Russian soldiers. After the hot stage of the conflict ended, the Wagner Group gained notoriety for darker deeds. Russian mercenaries are said to be the ones behind the wave of political killings in the Luhansk Republic, shootings of Ischenko, Mozgovoy, Bednov, and Drimov. Not long ago, these four men were allies of the Russian command and were fighting together with the Wagner forces. However, after proving to be ineffective and incapable of blindly following commands, they were eliminated by their own comrades. Wagner Group would eliminate anyone messing with the Kremlin. Nothing personal, just business. The Wagner Group has proven its value in Ukraine, managing to successfully follow the command and eliminate the necessary targets. The group of PMCs was growing, with hundreds of new soldiers joining their ranks. In 2015, many of them were sent to face a new challenge and continue their mission of terror and destabilization, but now in another country, Syria. The presence of the PMCs in Syria was the first reported in late October 2015, almost a month after the start of the Russian military intervention in the country's civil war. Russia has chosen the side of the Syrian government, along with Iran, mainly for the purpose of establishing its influence in the region and gaining control over the resources. When Russia launched its intervention in Syria in September 2015, the government spoke of a short-era operation. Boots on the ground were seen as taboo, especially to a population still haunted by memories of the costly Soviet war in Afghanistan. Since officially there were no Russian forces present, there could not be any losses. Having a nominally independent cadre of fighters to deploy as ground forces gave the Russian army plausible deniability. Wagner Group served to solve a concrete problem: have no casualties. The Kremlin was careful to describe the circumstances of their deaths as not in combat per se, since officially there were no Russian boots on the ground. Instead, they were portrayed as heroically sacrificing their lives as they guarded convoys of humanitarian aid, guided strikes by the Syrian Air Force, or negotiated among various factions. The Russian Defense Ministry dismissed the early reports by the Wall Street Journal about the Wagner Group's operations in Syria as an information attack. The Kremlin established a policy in Syria where companies that seize oil and gas wells, as well as mines from ISIS forces, would get oil and mining rights for those same sites. The job of Wagner forces was to ensure the capture and protection of such sites in the interest of the Russian Federation. Wagner PMCs were involved in both Palmyra offensives in 2016 and 2017, as well as the Syrian army's campaign in central Syria in the summer of 2017. And the Battle of Deir ez-Zor in late 2017. During the first Palmyra offensive, according to one of the contractors, the PMCs were used as cannon fodder, and most of the work was conducted by them, with the regular Syrian army, who he described as chickens, only finishing the job. An expert on the Russian security at the IIR, Mark Galeotti, said that they served as shock troops alongside the Syrian army. In early July 2017, a video emerged that showed Wagner's PMCs bludgeoning a man who was initially believed to be a captured ISIS militant in the Palmyra area, with the person being beheaded after. It was one of the first recorded tortures conducted by the Wagner Group. The murdered person was a Syrian army soldier who had deserted. The contractors also accused the man named Muhammad Abdullah al-Ishmael for being a jihadist for wanting to desert. Independent media reports identified one of the perpetrators as Stanislav Yevgenovich Dichko, a confirmed operative of the Wagner Group who previously worked for the Russian Interior Ministry. A second one was identified as a former soldier named Ruslan from Bryansk, currently employed as a patriotic educator in local schools. The war in Syria continued, and in mid-September 2017, the PMCs helped Syrian troops to capture the town of Uqayribat from ISIS in the central Hama province, as well as Deir ez-Zor by the end of November. The following year, Russian PMCs tried to capture the oil and gas fields near the city called Kasham, attacking the position of Kurdish, led by Syrian Democratic forces supported by the US government. The American Air Force intervened and stopped the attack, bombing the approaching units. By some reports, around 200 Wagner fighters died in that attack. As the war in Syria was progressing, so was the Wagner Group. Thousands of new recruits allowed them to launch a number of operations in the African region, all of them with the same goal: establishing a puppet government with the purpose of gaining control over the country's resources. The first steps Russians took in Sudan, a country torn apart by endless civil war. In an interview with The Insider in December 2017, veteran Russian officer Igor Strelkov said that Wagner PMCs were present in South Sudan. Several days before the interview was published, Strelkov stated Wagner PMCs were being prepared to be sent from Syria to Sudan or South Sudan after Sudan's president, Omar al-Bashir, told Russia's president, Putin, that his country needed protection from aggressive actions of the USA. Two internal conflicts have been raging in Sudan for years in the region of Darfur and the states of South Kordofan and Blue Nile, while a civil war has been taking place in South Sudan since 2013. In mid-December 2017, a video surfaced showing Wagner PMCs training members of the Sudanese military, thus confirming Wagner's presence in Sudan and not South Sudan. The PMCs were sent to Sudan to support its military against the south and protect gold, uranium, and diamond mines. After the division of the country, a majority appeared to be in the northern part, so the choice of the side for the Russian forces was obvious. In order to cover up the operation, Wagner forces acted undercover using a company called M-Invest. The company was granted permission for mining gold in Sudan, supposedly as part of the deal for helping the government stay in power. Around the same time, Russians have been launching a number of operations all around Africa. In 2018, Wagner deployed its personnel to the Central African Republic, ostensibly to protect lucrative mines, support the government, and provide close protection for the president, Faustin Archange Touadera. Another Russian firm, M-Finance, began its operation. The main area of activity was the mining of precious stones. The pattern was clear. Russia was looking for countries in Africa weakened by internal conflicts and offered protection for the local governments using the Wagner Group. In exchange, they would get to exploit and sell countries' natural resources. In the documents, everything was covered by the usage of umbrella companies such as M-Finance and M-Invest. Both companies were reported to be linked to the Russian oligarch and the man behind the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Simultaneously with the Central African campaign, Wagner Group began operating in Madagascar and Libya. Wagner PMCs arrived in Madagascar in April 2018 to guard political consultants that were hired by Yevgeny Prigozhin to accompany the presidential campaign of then-President Harry Rajaonarimampianina for the upcoming elections. The Russian-supported candidate lost the elections, which did not allow Wagner to further extend their influence. However, one of the last actions of President Harry was facilitating a Russian firm's takeover of Madagascar's national chromite producer, Craiova. Since then, Wagner forces were reported to be guarding the chrome mines in Madagascar, exploiting the natural resources of the country. The group's presence in Libya was first reported in October 2018, when the British tabloid The Sun claimed that Russian military bases had been set up in Benghazi and Tobruk in support of the Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar, who leads the Libyan National Army. The group was said to be providing training and support to Haftar's forces, and Russian missiles and SAM systems were also thought to be sent to Libya. The Libyan National Army made large advances in the country's south, capturing a number of towns in quick succession, including the city of Saba and Libya's largest oil field. The main objective was achieved with Russia gaining control over a 300,000 barrel per day oil field. In early August 2019, the Wagner Group received a contract with the government of Mozambique and arrived on a Russian AN-124 cargo plane in the country to provide technical and tactical assistance to the Mozambique Defense Armed Forces, and were stationed in 3 military barracks in the northern provinces of Nampula, Macomia, and Mueda. Wagner Group was then transported to the Cabo Delgado province, where from October 5, 2017, an Islamist insurgency had been taking place. Following the arrival of the PMCs, ISIS reinforced jihadist forces in Mozambique, leading to an increase in the number of militant attacks. By mid-November, 2 Mozambique military sources described growing tensions between Wagner and the government after a number of failed military operations. Towards the end of that month, it was reported that 200 PMCs had withdrawn from Mozambique following the deaths among its fighters. It was the first complete failure of Wagner Group in its African operations without being able to gain any strategic advantage for Russia. In mid-September 2021, according to diplomatic and security sources, an agreement was close to being finalized that would allow the Wagner Group to operate in Mali. According to conflicting sources, at least 1,000 PMCs or less would be deployed to Mali, which has been witnessing a civil war since 2012, and the Wagner Group would be paid about $10 million a month for training the Malian military and providing protection for government officials. Mali's defense minister praised Russia as a friendly country with which Mali has always maintained a very fruitful partnership. In mid-January 2022, Wagner PMCs were deployed at a former French military base in Timbuktu in northern Mali. Human Rights Watch published a report accusing Malian soldiers and Russian PMCs of executing around 300 civilians during a military operation in Mora in the Mopti region, known as a hotspot of Islamic militants. On the other side of the world, the Wagner Group was transported to Venezuela during the presidential crisis that was unfolding. Their objective was simple: provide security for President Nicolas Maduro, who was facing US-backed opposition protests as part of the socio-economic and political crisis that had been gripping Venezuela since 2010. PMCs were in Venezuela to mostly provide security for Russian business interests like the Russian energy company Rosneft. For years, Rosneft has been exploiting the rich oil resources of Venezuela, secretly transporting them back to Russia to be sold. They assisted in the training of the Venezuelan National Militia and the pro-Maduro Colectivos paramilitaries in 2018. The operation resulted in success, with Maduro securing his power in the country. For years, Russia continued its barbaric actions around the world, supporting the dictatorships, sparking civil wars, and eliminating anyone who opposed the regime while the Western powers kept their eyes closed. A number of countries were under the tough grip of the Kremlin, with the Russian militaries controlling every single move while profiting greatly from the country's natural resources. January 2022. The Times reported that the Wagner Group flew in more than 400 contractors from the Central African Republic on a mission to assassinate Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the members of his government, and thus to prepare the ground for Russia to take control for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which started on the 24th of February. Things did not go as planned, and what was meant to be a 3-day-long conflict turned out to be a long, bloody war with thousands of Russian troops dying in Ukrainian soil. The message was clear: if Kremlin wants to progress further in the war, they would need the best of the best, and the best they've had was Wagner Group. Mercenaries who for already 9 years have sparked a number of wars around the world and were the most tough and prepared soldiers among all. Starting from March, Russia began withdrawing their Wagner units from their African campaign and moving them to the most dangerous zones on the front line. In late April, a Russian military offensive to take the remainder of the Donbas region was launched, and Wagner PMCs took part in the Battle of Popasna, the capture of Svetlodarsk, the Battle of Sievierodonetsk, and the Battle of Lysychansk. However, even the usage of Wagner forces did not allow Russians to have the progress they wanted. Continuous attacks led to an overwhelming number of casualties. Most of those whom they sent were already dead. So, Yevgeny Prigozhin had to act, and act fast. From the beginning of July, he began his recruitment campaign in Russian prisons, where he would offer inmates a chance at freedom and monetary rewards. He would look for murderers, rapists, and terrorists. He needed the worst of the worsts. Only those kind of people would be able to perform the tasks that were a specialty of Wagner: torture and terror. Most of them had lifelong prison sentences with no chance of seeing freedom. Joining Wagner was their ticket back, and they would do anything for it. In August, Wagner was tasked with capturing the city of Bakhmut, one of the most heavily fortified sections on the front. For over 9 months, severe battles kept going, with Russians not being able to take over full control of the city. It was a major humiliation for the Wagner Group, who had sacrificed over 5,000 lives for the sake of taking Bakhmut. Starting from late March, Prigozhin began trying to lay the responsibility for the failure on others and launched a number of informational attacks, stating that for already a long time, Wagner Group had not had enough ammunition and that the Russian Ministry of Defense was to blame for this. Up to this day, it is not clear what will become of this conflict. However, Wagner Group has proved not to be as effective as they used to be in their African campaign. The growing scale of war showed that Wagner fighters may only give Russia an advantage in small and invisible operations and conflicts. When faced with a proper modernized army, Russian mercenaries tend not to overvalue the regular armed forces. Wars, tortures, assassinations, blood money, and dummy companies. All of this from a network which is known as the Wagner Group. A project of the Kremlin, operates from the shadows, allowing Russia to pursue its interests in other countries, gaining influence, power, and most importantly, control over the resources. Lithuania, Estonia, and France are the first countries so far that have recognized Wagner Group as a terrorist organization, with parliaments of a number of other countries working towards that goal. The 10-year-long project seems to reach its final phase, with the Russian-Ukrainian war being the last objective. The group of mercenaries came out of the shadows and no longer gives Russians any advantage in the global arena as it once used to. This almost certainly puts an end to the existence of such an organization in the near future, at least in the form that we know it.